Welcome to the Biblical X-Files, where we attempt to connect myths, legends, and conspiracies to a biblical worldview and unpack those untold stories in the Bible.
Before we get started today, I would like to thank each and every one of our viewers, of course, for the support. We've gotten a lot of really positive feedback and, of course, some questions. We're still combining the questions together to make a full video on that. This episode, however, episode 4, we're talking about the evidence for giants. So before we get into this episode, guys, it's going to be an exciting one. I know for sure I'm very interested to hear what he has to say. Hit the like button on the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notifications, make sure you're notified so that way the YouTube algorithm doesn't suppress us. So anyway, that being said, Jai, let's get into it.
All right, man. So tonight, like you said, we're going to open up a file just titled Giants. And over the next few episodes, we're going to look and discuss the evidence of hybrid. When I say giant, remember I'm talking about hybrid humans, talking about giants, Nephilim, and you're going to see through this episode how Scripture calls them different names. We're going to go over each name. And so we're going to look at the evidence of these giants that's still around us today. We're going to look at their handiwork, and we're going to kind of discuss and probably have a what if, what is this for? But I think we can even go past the what if and probably come down to a pretty concrete reason why some of these megalithic rocks that are out there today, pyramids, other weird and strange structures, not just overseas in Europe and South America, Asia, but right here in our own homeland, not far from where we live, actually, some structures that you can trace back probably to these giants and these Nephilim. Did you know that giants are in almost every culture? There's talk, or there's folklore, or there's legends about giants. You can't go to any culture and not find one.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I knew it was pretty widespread, but that's interesting.
It's amazing. And according to Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, there that verse again, they're the legends of old, the legends, the heroes of old, these giants that were pre-flood and post-flood. And we're going to talk about a little bit of that verse later on, because I failed to mention something when we were in the Nephilim file, and I think it'll tie in good as we're looking at giants. But have you ever wondered why giants have been kind of pushed back into just like folklore or mythology or a cartoon or something like that, and they're not talked about or taught in school?
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, because evidence is overwhelming. There is a conspiracy. It's not a conspiracy, it's a fact, that the United States government around 1950 started to suppress the evidence of giants in our homeland. And that will be a file. In fact, we filed a FOIA request with the Smithsonian to find, to look at the evidence of the bones being taken into the Smithsonian. We haven't heard anything yet, but we'll get into that in an episode in the future. But tonight I want us to kind of look at, are giants real? Can you find evidence of giants in Scripture and outside of Scripture? The different types of giants exist, like tribes or sects of giants in Scripture and in other parts of the world. And how did Nephilim make a comeback? If God destroyed them in the flood, how did they come back? Because there's evidence that they were back. And we believe that when Jesus said it will be like the days of Noah, no, he doesn't say Nephilim in there. But if you look at the sentence, it will be like as if it is the days of Noah. You got to go back and look at what was going on in Noah's time. So that means giants will be back in some type of form. You got to remember, the evidence that we're going to look at comes from the first 5 books of the Bible. And Moses wrote that 850 years after the flood. And he puts a lot of information about giants in these passages, in the 5 books. We're not going to read, obviously we don't have time to read every verse, but I'm going to select some verses out of Scripture tonight to read, pointing to the evidence of giants. And then I'm going to give you a bunch of verses people can go look up on their own. Let me ask you this as we get started. How many types of giants? Don't say Goliath, because everybody knows him. That's the easy one. How many types of giants or communities of giants or giants in general do you think the Old Testament mentions? There's 9 unique mentions of giants in the Old Testament. The first giant we're going to look at are what's called the Rephaim giants. Okay, you will see that word Rephaim in Scripture. We're going to read a verse with it in just a minute. And that is a particular tribe of giants, as a description of a hybrid in the Old Testament. You got Raphael and Raphael, and the Raphael is the plural for that. So it's just saying if it's just one, it's a Raphael giant. If it's plural, it's going to be a Raphael. There's a whole bunch show up, kind of like, a flock of whatever. Well, these Raphael giants are mentioned 25 times in the Old Testament. So they get a bunch of mentions. They lived at the time of, ever heard of a guy named Abraham and Lot? Okay, remember Lot, Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham, the father of the Hebrew nation. Mm-hmm. The Raphael giants lived in their time frame. So when you're thinking of stories, when you read it in Old Testament about those guys, know that in the backdrop, there are Raphael giants all in the land, all around. And so some verses on the Raphael giants, but before that, you can look and see the biblical giants. We have a display of them, and the man is the arrow pointing down, which was for the display photo. It's 6 foot tall, but we know that people in the Old Testament were quite a bit shorter than that, and it shows the extreme change, just size discrepancy. So it's kind of alarming when you look at these guys, what a computer simulation of what the giants would look like based on information from Scripture. So let me read you some verses. I'll give you some verses. What we're going to look at is in Genesis chapter 14, verse 5. And in this verse, it mentions 3 different sects, 3 different tribes of giants, just in one verse. But you can also find the Raphael giants in Deuteronomy 3, chapter 11, Joshua 15, verse 8, Joshua 18, verse 16, 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 18, 2 Samuel 23, verse 13, 1 Chronicles chapter 11, verse 15, and chapter 14, verse 9, and Isaiah chapter 17, verse 5. So that's a lot of verses with these guys mentioned in it. And when you look at those verses, people at home, if you would want to go vet us and look, you can see it's either going to say giant or it's going to say Raphael. But if you look at the giant and what it comes from in the Hebrew, it's Raphael. Sometimes the King James translators put Raphael, and sometimes they put giants. Don't know why they intermixed it, but that's the way it works. So let's read a verse. In the 14th year of Chedorlaomer, the king who were, and the kings who were with him came and defeated the Raphael at Ashtaroth Karim. So that's the Raphael giant. So King Chedorlaomer, whatever his name is, he came up and he fought these group of giants that were the Raphael giants. He also defeated the Zamzun giants, and he also defeated, according to verse 5, the Amim giants. All 3 he killed, and this was probably from the Lord helping destroy these giants and kind of get some of these guys out, and they dispersed. And we're going to talk about how they dispersed from here in the Holy Land to parts unknown, and we can trace evidence back to some of these giants right here from our own country. But let's keep reading. Joshua 5:8 doesn't use the word Raphael. It says, and the border went up to the valley, the son of Hinnom. You read on down, and it says, all the way to the end of the valley of the giants. And if you look at that in the Hebrew, it's Raphael northward. So you see both of those words there from several sources. So the Raphael giants were big giants. They were ones that caused havoc. They waged war, but they were kind of if you wanted to say it, they were kind of a loose-fitting tribe of giants. They weren't real organized, and they didn't really seem like they had a battle plan. They were just out there wreaking havoc. They were just really unorganized. But we'll look at some other tribes of giants here that are very organized as we keep going. The next set of tribe of giants is the Amim giants mentioned in Scripture. These giants existed for sure after the flood, just like the ones we just mentioned in Abraham and Lot. So far, we're just looking at post-flood giants. They were known as a warrior tribe. They had a reputation throughout the land of, if you see them, come and run, because you're not going to beat them. They lived east of the Jordan River, according to Scripture, and they plundered lots of cities. But specifically in Scripture, they would always go and plunder Sodom and Gomorrah during the time Lot lived there. So Lot saw these guys coming and going, but he was set out by the city gates. The Amim giants can be found in Deuteronomy chapter 2, verses 9 through 10. I'm not going to read you the verses. People can go look that up if they want to. But verse 10 basically says, Amim giants formerly lived there a people of great many, basically saying there was a huge number down in there around the valley where Sodom and Gomorrah was located, and they were as tall as another giant that they say, the Akim giants, which we're going to get into in just a second. So they got the Rephaim giants, you got the Amin giants, and then they mentioned another one here, the Akim giants. So now you're looking at 3 tribes for sure, and we're going to look at a couple other ones. There's a brief mention in Scripture of a giants that lived east of the Jordan River that were probably always fighting the Amin giants because they never could get together, and they were called the Zanzums, and they're only mentioned once in Scripture, and they get destroyed by I believe it's Lot's descendants. The Lord supernaturally comes in and helps destroy that group of giants according to Scripture. I don't really know.
So the flood's not the only example of God directly intervening to try to stop the issue.
Actually, you're going to see more of that as we look through it. You see, we're going to look at some giants in a minute, and God gives some pretty specific orders that sound really horrible for a loving God, to go in and kill every man, woman, child, kill their livestock, and burn the fields. I mean, that sounds like a terrorist organization of some type, but that's God giving a command to the Israelites, and we'll look at that in just a second because we're going to look at these Anakim giants. Remember last week when we were talking about the report that came in from the 12 spies, and Joshua and Caleb talked about the grasshopper. We were a grasshopper to these giants, and you said, "Hey, was that just hyperbole?"
Yeah, I just didn't. Yeah.
And I said, "No, they were actually talking about it as a military report. They were being as precise in their articulation as they could because it was a military report." Well, this is the giants that they were talking about right here, the Akim giants, and these guys somehow they kept the bloodline pure, an unholy bloodline pure. They remained the 50-50 hybrid all the way through. They didn't have any lessening. They had some rules among the giant community there, and this is what they were. So they maintained pretty much. They were the Nephilim, almost like pre-flood. They were big. They were Canaanite. They occupied the promised land. They were known as Canaanites. You've heard of Canaanites in the Bible. That's these guys. These guys here were genetically modifying food according to Scripture. They were genetically modifying animals, not according to Scripture, but you have to assume that if the Lord was saying, if God gave the commandment to kill the people, destroy the food, and destroy the animals, everything has been genetically modified in that region. And so the next slide we have shows you the grapes, how big they are according to Scripture. Remember how the 2 Israelite spies had to carry them out on a big stick? So those grapes would have been about this big. So think about a human person trying to eat a grape the size of a beach ball. That's not going to work. But if you're 36 to 40 foot tall, that's about right for going in your mouth for a big succulent grape. And so you missed that in your Sunday school class. You just think about these big grapes, but you don't understand who they were feeding, and you also don't understand that was a genetically modified grape. You ever seen a grape like that?
No, I don't think that's how God would have designed that.
Exactly. So that's once again, after the flood, they're starting to do the same mischief that they did before the flood with genetically modifying everything right here. And do you find it ironic that they're doing it in the area that God has promised the Hebrew people?
Of course not.
And so once again, it falls right in line with Satan's modus operandi of always trying to corrupt, contaminate, and counterfeit what God has ordained as good, what God has created, and what God intends. And here's just another shot in the dark you have with him and his minions trying to do that corruption, because that's all he is a corrupter and a liar. So God commanded, like I said, all the Canaanites, you go in there and you wipe them out. Now, obviously, a couple guys mind your size in the live audience with some slingshots and spears are going to have a hard time running out 40-foot dudes, right? So you know that that's a supernatural work of God when he runs them out and kills them, And then you find Amorite and Canaanite evidence of giants in our homeland. And when you date the stuff back, it's about probably within this time frame of when they were ran out, the survivors came to America. And we're going to look at that down the road, the evidence of the scrolls in the tablets that are found here in America written in their language. It only could come from a Canaanite, only could come from an Amorite. In fact, King Og, we're going to talk about in a minute, his language is all over some of those tablets, of those copper writings. And he invented his own Amorite language, and that's what's found in America as well. So Satan positioned his most powerful forces in the promised land to prevent the Israelites from taking what God had promised them. Basically, with these, that's obviously why these giants are there. I mean, there's a lot of debate about why they're there, or even if they are giants, but the evidence is overwhelming. If you don't, you can choose not to believe the truth, but it's right there in front of you. These giants were there. Satan put them there to stop God's plan. He corrupted, he contaminated everything. And again, what was he doing pre-flood?
The same thing.
Same thing. So right now you can see within this small window of time, he hasn't really expanded his thought process on how am I going to change and make it work, because I tried it before the flood, it didn't work. He's going to try here and it doesn't work. And you'll start seeing through time how he starts to change the way he works to achieve his end game, which he can never do, but in his mind that he has to keep trying, right? So another reason people overlook why these giants had to be destroyed, because God is not a God of genocide. God is a loving, gracious God. Think of all the chances he's given you and me when we jack things up, right? He is a God of mercy. He is a God of grace, or he never would have sent Jesus to die on the cross for us. So him taking drastic measures right here with the Canaan is no different than what he did to the whole world that was corrupted when he could only find 8, with the flood. So there's no different. It's just God's way of dealing with it is different, but he's still dealing with it. Think of this. If these giants were able to stay in the promised land, they would have built an empire, right? Because these guys were like really, they had some beautiful cities in the promised land already built for the Israelites to take over. Once these giants were run out, and they were advanced. And if they were able to build an empire, forget about the contamination part, right? Just forget about contaminate, because I think Satan was doing a two-pronged attack here. He was trying to contaminate like he did before, but he was also trying to interfere with biblical prophecy, because Daniel's going to have a prophecy about eschatology that Nebuchadnezzar has, and he has this big statue, right? And it has different like gold, silver, bronze, clay, and that represents each world empire that will exist from the beginning to the end. Starts with Nebuchadnezzar, it goes to the Medo-Persians, and then it goes to the Greeks, then it goes to Rome, and then the feet of that statue that Daniel interprets for Nebuchadnezzar is the rebirth of the Roman Empire in the end times. It never would have worked, because this would have been the empire that took over for Nebuchadnezzar. It never would have happened with the gold with Nebuchadnezzar. So he's messing with prophecy here. Messing with prophecy and messing with the gene pool, trying two different tactics to make God a liar, which you can't do.
Right.
That makes sense?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
All right, so we talked about the most famous individual giant, and that would be...
Well, I mean, I know of Goliath, but
he's the most famous. He's the one that everybody talks about. That's the one you learned about in Sunday school. David comes out. Now, slingshot. Does that strike you funny that David comes out with the slingshot and like goes down to a brook and he pulls out and select? They don't teach you this in Sunday. They teach you this in Sunday school, but not why. And he gets these smooth stones, and he puts them in a sling, and then he just donks, like a miracle. He donks Goliath in the head, and Goliath falls down. You as a kid, you picture like that, right?
Yeah.
Nothing like that at all. Do you know that in the time of David, all the way up through the Roman army, had expert slingers that could sling a rock 200 yards and hit a moving animal. They were so dead, it'd be like getting hit with a 45 up close, and they were utilized by the Roman Empire almost as much as they did their archers. But people don't think about somebody with a slingshot, going up. And so the distance from David when he slung his rock at Goliath is the equivalent of Goliath getting shot between the eyes with the 45 long.
Oh my gosh.
So it's not like a little stone hit his head. Yeah, God performed a miracle and directed it straight there, but God performed a miracle also of teaching David how to do that, like giving him the ability, because not everybody could do that.
Yeah.
But David could. Obviously, he was an expert with the slingshot. We just think of some little kid out watching sheep with a little slingshot in his back pocket.
Yeah,
and all
and I
that.
think that also diminishes like Goliath's physique and his power too. The fact that it was so easy to kill him, but it really wasn't easy. What you're saying is the power behind that kind of that technique. It wasn't what we think of now as like a modern Y-shaped slingshot. It's a totally different technology.
Exactly. Me and you trying to use that would kill ourselves. Yeah. We'd hurt everybody in this room. We'd be in the hospital. Yeah. It'd be like that Ralphie Christmas thing. We would shoot our eye out. There's no doubt somebody would get hurt. Okay, but he was an expert. So 1 Samuel 17:8 says something very unique that's overlooked by a lot of theologians when it comes to Goliath, but they're not looking at Goliath really through a Nephilim prism. They're just looking at him as some big giant Philistine. It says, choose you a man, let him come down to me. That's when he's out there taunting, Goliath's out there taunting the nation of Israel, parading up and down, very, prideful and boasting, because nobody's ever beat Goliath. Sure. So you've watched that movie Troy before. Mm-hmm. They come out and they're going to have one person fight, and then whoever wins it saves thousands of soldiers from the fight. That's what they would do. They'd parade Goliath out there. He'd kill somebody, and then war's over. Everybody gets to go home and be captured and be Philistine prisoners of war or whatever. But David says there, I'm not going to put up with this anymore. This has got to stop. But when Goliath said, choose you a man and send him down, that word choose, what do you think that means?
To me, that seems like look at everyone's skill sets, their strengths and everything, and select your top soldier.
Yes. Yeah. Bring out your best to fight the best, and the best man wins, and only one person has to die. Everybody else gets to go home, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know we talked about that recently, how it was kind of a diplomatic. Well, I don't know if that ended up in the episode or not. In episode 1, maybe. I don't remember if that was that while we were filming the trailer? I don't remember. But we were talking about how that was kind of at the time, a diplomatic approach to avoiding a mass war,
a bloodbath,
with a lot of casualties. That's really interesting to think. That's a pretty sophisticated idea for that long ago, to approach it with a 1v1 in a fight instead of country versus country. That's really interesting.
Yeah, and it would be a better way, I guess, to fight, and if you had the Goliath on your side.
I was about to say,
but wait a minute. But what about David? He beat him, right? So things aren't always what they appear. God's in control. But that word "choose" in verse 8, like you said, it's like to pick your best guy. Select the person you think can beat me. Don't send out the cook. Send out your battle-hardened veteran. I want a challenge. That's and that's kind of what it means. But it's from the Hebrew word. This word "choose" comes from the Hebrew word "bara," and "bara" means to eat. It means to consume, and it means to devour. Now the Hebrew translators that were putting this together for the King James Bible looked at barer, which barer and bara come from the same root, and it's easy to put. You can put them both in. But in the original Hebrew, because bara says the barer means to select, bring out someone, and they're kind of side by side. But if you look at it through the lens of a Nephilim and they're cannibals, it would be send out somebody that I could eat.
Yeah, that's and you would think just without knowing that part of the language, his demeanor would be that way. I mean, he's cocky, he's arrogant. Obviously, he's got a massive size and skill advantage, strength advantage. So for him to say that sounds in line with that. That would even be something a non-giant would say, just as a joke, kind of like a taunt, like
right.
Pick somebody who I can devour, who I can just swallow whole.
But he
meant it.
Yeah, he meant it, and literally, because
that's scary.
Because there's some historical writings that say that Goliath and his brother, because he had a bunch of brothers too that are mentioned in Scripture that Israel eventually kills. They go and kill all of his all of his siblings who were giants the same height as him. There's some historical writings that's exactly what Goliath would do in the battles. Is they would come out, once he killed them, he would pick them up and he would bite them and eat them just to put terror into the world.
Yeah, well, to me that makes a lot more sense to understand how it was even feasible for them to do the 1 versus 1 combat? Because I'm pretty sure if you witnessed your best guy getting literally demolished and then eaten, I'm pretty sure that would kind of settle the dispute, between countries. You don't need to get everyone else involved. Like, okay, I've seen enough.
Now I agree. If I saw somebody, I would just be a deserter, I guess, and put up with that down the road. But you can look at it how you want to. Through what, if you want to look at it through, hey, select somebody, send me your battle hardened, that's cool. Or you can look at it through a Nephilim prism, and he's saying, select me your battle hardened, because I want to kill him and I'm going to eat him. I'm just going to show you how much of a bad man I am. So either one I think is correct. But I'm not going to argue about it, but I just wanted to throw that out there to give people food for thought, to look at it from a different prism based on the wording. Food for thought. You like that play on words?
Yeah, that was a good one.
All right, so then I mentioned early on when we first started this episode, there is an unnamed giant found in 1 Chronicles chapter 20, verse 4, and in 1 Chronicles chapter 21, verse 1, who it just says he had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes. Now, this is what's unique about it. Do you realize that there are numerous, I don't know the exact number, numerous indigenous American Indian tribes who, in their folklore, battled 6-fingered and 6-toed giants before the white man came to America. Now listen, have you ever seen a movie before where they go, the cowboy's riding, he's all dusted, he comes up and there's some Indians sitting there and they go, how? Peace. And you go, I come in peace, and you hold your hand up. They would literally make soldiers and people in the plains in the West, as the West was being settled, so to speak, do that so they could count your fingers. And if you didn't have 5 fingers, or if you had more than 5 fingers, you were their enemy.
Wow.
So that's how much giants were ingrained into their way of survival, to count people's fingers to make sure that they weren't part of a giant tribe right here in America. And you can trace the origin of that all the way back to 1 Chronicles. I think that's pretty cool, connecting those dots.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah.
All right, so Nimrod. What do you know of him? Other than, hey, you're a Nimrod.
Yeah, that's about it for me. Yeah, I mean, I'm curious to hear what you've got.
Nimrod, there's so little writing about Nimrod in Scripture. You can find him in Genesis chapter 10, verse 8. And it says, and Cush. Now, Cush is the son of Ham. Coming off the ark, you have Noah's sons. One of them is named Ham. He had a kid named Cush, and he begat Nimrod. And it says, the verse says, Genesis chapter 10, verse 8 says, he began to be, that's important, we're going to have to look at that, a mighty one in the earth. Now if you just gloss over that in the English, it means and it repeats itself. He became a mighty hunter, a mighty one in earth. A mighty hunter doesn't sound bad, and being a mighty one, that doesn't have that bad of a, that doesn't sound horrible, right? Yeah. But when you look at the Hebrew on that, when you look at it, says began to be, comes from a Hebrew word that says became. So basically what it's saying is, Nimrod was born just a normal kid. He grew up, and at some point in his life, in his early adulthood, he became something other than a man. It says he became a mighty one, and that comes from the Hebrew word Gabor, which means giant, which means Nephilim. So here's the first person in Scripture, I would say in the world, that became Nephilim that wasn't born from Bain Elohim.
Interesting. Okay, so how do you suspect that happened?
Well, I think how we went and we were going through, and this kind of caused a wrinkle with some people. Can you say got their butt hairs on fire?
No.
Okay. All
right. Not allowed to say that, Jai. Take that back.
Just wondering.
Oh gosh.
It got people to really question what I'm saying when it comes to holy DNA and unholy DNA. And this is happening before the human genome is unpacked with the Human Genome Project and all that. somehow there was a transference of, had to be a transference of DNA. Now there's some speculation and there's some writings that say that Ham, we'll get into this in just a minute, went up on Mount Hermon and found some writings, some tablets, and some copper, basically like a scroll that the original fallen ones had wrote on and left on Mount Hermon as they went out around the world. And so there could have been an incantation, but some theologians, and I kind of agree with this, that Nimrod became a Gabor, he became a giant through some sort of transfer, some sort of I don't even want to call it a demonic seance, but something to that effect within a Stonehenge. Okay, and we're going to talk about Stonehenges in a minute. And it could even, and that's probably, some say he could have built his Tower of Babel on top of that hinge where it originated at, and to get it higher, to be more of a semiconductor of power, to get it more up off the ground, because that ziggurat that he built, it was technology based. It was fireproof brick. It was waterproof brick. And the furnace that he built these bricks in is the very furnace that Nebuchadnezzar threw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in years later. Okay, so that somehow they developed some sort of technology out there in that plain of Dura that made a brick fireproof, and he made it waterproof. Why do you think Nimrod made a brick waterproof?
He was just being extra careful.
He's being extra careful. You know why? Because he didn't want to get flooded out. And he said the next way God's going to judge, since he's not going to do it with the flood, because he gave us a rainbow, he's going to do it with fire. And so he said, I make fireproof, waterproof, I'm indestructible.
He's ready for both.
And see, and this mighty one, when you look at it, and he was I know of 3 types of Antichrist. You've always heard in Sunday school and church, some preachers maybe preach on types of Christ, like David, Abraham, Moses. They had these types of Christ in them where you can see like what Christ is going to be when he comes through these men. And they're called types of Christ, probably 20 of them or more in the Old Testament that you can see leading up, that you're going to see attributes of Christ when he gets to earth. There's 3 in the Bible that you could say are types of the Antichrist. Nimrod being the first, because he's the first one world. He's the type of the Antichrist. He's the first one world governor. He had a one world system, a one world currency, and he was the one world provider. The reason why it says he's a mighty hunter, all these hundreds of thousands of people living in and around Babel never had to work to get food. He would go out. There's all types of writings that will talk about how Nimrod would go out and kill enough food to feed 100,000 people at night, just come back with all this game and just drop it down for them to eat. The way he planted vegetables, he was doing the genetically modifying of grain and fruits. People were having a little utopia. That's why they loved to follow Nimrod. They didn't have to work because he provided them food, just like the Antichrist will do in the end times. He's going to be the one world government, the provider. Like God's supposed to be our provider. Nimrod just personified all this, and he provided everything. He became a giant. He became a Gabor, and he is one of the other 2 types of Antichrist that are mentioned in Scripture. One is Judas, and the other is Antiochus. And Antiochus went into the temple, and he went in and desecrated the Holy of Holies. He butchered a pig, sprinkled the blood on the Holy of Holies, cooked it in the Holy of Holies, and then forced the priest, the high priest, to come in and eat the food. And if they wouldn't eat that unclean meat that was cooked on the Holy of Holies, which I think all of them died except one, he would just kill them right there and just stack them up like cordwood in the temple. And he is an example of what the Antichrist is going to do in the second half of the tribulation, when he goes into the temple that will be reconstructed, the third temple, and say, everybody in the world's got to worship me. That will be just like what Antiochus did. So those are the 3 types of Antichrist, Nimrod being one of them. And think about him. He was just born a dude. Just an everyday kid, played with blocks and Legos and ate candy and went to school and was this good little kid, and then all of a sudden became something horrible.
Well, briefly, could you explain, because I haven't heard reference to that, the whole one world governor aspect? Like he had a more or less of a global control. Can you explain a little bit about that part of it?
Yeah. See, when after the flood, they were told to go out and disperse, right? And so they all kind of just came into this valley there where he built the Tower of Babel, and we all think of the Tower of Babel as what is your idea of the Tower of Babel?
Well, I bounce back and forth about whether or not it was I know it was a physical. They were talking about a physical structure, of course, but I think I've heard maybe too much reference about the metaphorical aspiration of these people to essentially create like a stairway to heaven, essentially a physical structure that could achieve a certain level of unity with everyone, and that does sound very one world order-esque. And I understand after that God divided the people and the languages and everything, and that was kind of a sign of whatever they were doing was too much unity. It wasn't the right kind of unity. It was like a unifying structure that wasn't celebrating God. It was celebrating man's ability to build to heaven. That was my best sort of metaphorical understanding of what the Tower of Babel was.
All right, I wasn't planning on going there tonight, but let's just talk about it. All right, so the Tower of Babel was we were taught in Sunday school that it was, and a lot of times in our church teaching, that it was a tower that was constructed for people to get to heaven, and they were disobeying God, and they weren't following God's guidance to go out and spread out and inhabit the entire world. So he confounded the languages, all right, instead of from being one common language to the many languages that we have now. If you read in there about the Tower of Babel, and that's probably like the next chapter over in Genesis 11, where it talks about God came down to the tower and looked around and said, there's nothing these guys can't do if I don't intervene. And instead of like sending fire, destroying everybody like he just did just a couple, this is only 200 years after the flood.
Holy cow. Yeah, that's like, and that already kind of quasi answers my question about the one world government. I mean, the world wasn't that big only a couple hundred years after the flood.
Right.
Started with 8 people.
They were supposed to go out all over the world and start creating the world again, right? So technically, if you want to get technical, this is still in the days of Noah, because it's only a couple hundred years after the fact. You got to go, the flood is like a center point, so you got to have to go a few years after the flood. All that encompasses the days of Noah. So when we say Jesus says it's going to be like the days of Noah, he's talking about a one world government. He's pointing to the rapture. He's pointing to all the stuff that's going to take place in Revelation if people just open up their mind and see what he's saying, right? Because you got to understand that it's not just up to the flood. The flood, when they disembarked the ark, that didn't mean the days of Noah quit.
Right.
They stopped. Right. You got to go a couple generations out. Everybody on that boat had to die off before the days of Noah were over.
Yeah, at least, yeah.
Okay, see what I'm saying? So we're still in the days of Noah. So right after, in the days of Noah, that's why it's important to understand the days of Noah when Jesus says that in Matthew 24. You already have a one-world government. You already have a guy that is like a symbol of the Antichrist to come. They had a one-world banking system all through Nimrod. Every coin had his image on it. Technology. Think of how Daniel says at the very end, right before part of his prophecy, he says that knowledge is going to increase and travel is going to be basically increase, which means travel from like having to walk 20 miles a day at the best back when Daniel was around, or if you were lucky, you got to ride a horse. Now we're shooting around in airplanes, and we got, we can go the speed of sound and all that sort of stuff. So you can see how that technology that Daniel's talking about is happening right before our very eyes. But it happened right here with Nimrod as well. It says when you read the story of Nimrod in Genesis 10 and 11, it talks about they got this pitch. They found this pitch that was there that is basically kind of an oil, like a oil-based pitch that they can manipulate and make it waterproof and make it fireproof. And some say it's the same. It's a derivative of the same pitch that they put in Moses' basket when he was put in the Nile River. It's a derivative of that. But it's technology. People don't understand that the Tower of Babel is technology. Technology got to the point to where there's nothing man couldn't do, and so God had to intervene. And that's another sign that you need to look for as you're going down the prophetic timetable. When technology gets to the point where it seems like there's nothing out of the reach of man, God's going to do something drastic, and that's a snatching away of the church. If this is like the days of Noah, right? Yeah. And so right here is the first time you see technology coming on the scene, where technology advanced a quantum leap. Before they would make bricks, they would take this straw and they would take this mud and they would take animal dung and they would pile it together. They would put it in a mold, a primitive looking mold, pack it in and set it out in the sun and walk away, and the sun would have to dry it to the point to where it could be used. Some of them would fall apart. Some of the mixture wasn't right. So if you put 100 bricks out in the sun, right, in the time of Nimrod, you might get 20 usable bricks out of that to build with, and your structure is not going to be that great, okay? Yeah. They invented something that made the structure go up to the heavens, but he was a Gabor. He was a Nephilim at that point, so this was evil. And if you look at that zuggurat, the way it is, and the way it's positioned, because they've unearthed it. It's about 50 miles south of Baghdad. And so they're unearthing the ruins of it now as we speak. I mean, maybe there's some fighting going on there now, but they were unearthing it. And I'm really curious to see if they find that hinge that other writings talk about under in the base of. But I'm curious to find out once they unearth all four corners of it to see what cardinal points, north, south, east, west, how it lines up with the zodiac and how it lines up with the equinoxes. Now, something else that's amazing that Nimrod did that just thought of. Have you ever heard of the Meseroth, the Hebrew Meseroth? I might as well put this up. The Hebrew Meseroth?
Nope.
Okay, it was Google it. All right, so it was back in the day. It is a Hebrew zodiac, the same zodiac we have now. That's been turned into an occultic practice, but it points to Christ. It points to Jesus being born. And you know Leo the lion? Mm-hmm. That's the tribe of Judah that Jesus is going to come from. That was taught by the Hebrew people before the flood. Noah taught it after the flood to all of his descendants. They would look up to the constellations, and they would tell a story about Christ to come. Nimrod is the one that took that and perverted it and make it into the occult thing that it is today. Sure. And that's what the Tower of Babel was about. It's a semiconductor. I believe that it opened portals.
Holy cow.
Okay, I believe that it opened portals, and using the zodiac and using some other things that they were doing. And they were opening up portals, and they were messing with things they weren't supposed to mess with, and God came down and said, get out of here.
So because he became a Gabor, a Nephilim, he inherited the intellect, the brain power, and perhaps maybe even some of the genetic, I don't know how to say it, but basically like knowledge of technology and of certain materials and metals and techniques that the Nephilim were famous for before the flood. So he inherited a lot of that skill set and that intellect, and he implemented that to the Tower of Babel. Absolutely.
That's exactly what he did. And they tapped into some very ungodly, unholy things with that. Did you notice that it's kind of like a pyramid? And did you notice that they're all over the world? The Mayans and all those have the same thing, mm-hmm. right? Yep. And then you have those in Asia. How did they get all over the world? Well, these guys, when they left and had to go to all parts of the world speaking their gibberish because they didn't know what they were, the ones that spoke, Mandarin or whatever, they went to Asia, but they built ziggurats. The guys who came over here and then started inhabiting Central America and what is known now as Mexico, they had the same things in America. You don't have to drive but maybe 3 hours over to Cartersville to those ruins there, and you'll see that the Indians, they even tell you that there was these things that look like a ziggurat before we got here, and we just started occupying them and started using them. And so they're all over the place, and that all originates with Nimrod, and they have special power that we just write off. If you say, oh, they were opening up portals, get out your tin hat, you're crazy, nobody's going to, but what else could it be? These guys are extra dimensional beings. They have to get to the dimension in different ways. And how do you think these giants left Canaan and got here to America, do you think they went up across a land bridge? No, man, they jumped in a portal and popped right out here.
Yeah, that's the kind of crazy stuff that, again, like when I told you my understanding, my very limited understanding of the Tower of Babel, I don't really have much to say as far as why I think they did it and what it was really doing. But when you look at it through the context of Nephilim and their agenda and their capabilities, it makes a lot more sense. It wasn't just some nonsensical tower just to look pretty, and to look at and perhaps maybe, worship or use as some dumb form of shelter. It was without the Nephilim angle, it seems very trivial. Like, okay, why'd they put that much effort and attention to detail with the technology, which in and of itself was kind of surprising, the waterproof, fireproof, like you said, it was ahead of its time. It all makes a lot more sense, like the motive and the actual outcome of that tower and the reason God intervened. It's not like he saw it and was like, dang, these people are building a really tall structure. That's sinful.
Yeah, he'd be upset about a bunch of buildings nowadays.
Yeah, like New York City would just get, a meteor shower right now, So I think clearly it wasn't just about the very base level technology display. I don't think God was merely struck by that. Just, wow, they built that tall and it's standing up nicely. No, it's clearly something deeper than that. And what you're saying sounds crazy, but again, why else would it have been such a threat to God? Just like the Noah story with flooding the earth, it got to an urgent level that wasn't just about sin. There was something else at play. And the same thing was true with the Tower of Babel too.
You have to just clue into there's nothing that they can't do, that they can't imagine, that they can't do if I don't change the language and get them. It wasn't that they needed their language changed. It was that they had to get out of there because they were starting to witness, there's hundreds of thousands of people are starting to witness how Nimrod is opening up portals, showing them how to tap into this evil power that exists.
Can I pause you for 1 second? I'm having a thought bubble here. If God stopped the progress like that because he started to see they're learning too much, they're implementing too much, that to me sounds like a very reactionary thing for God to do, because he obviously created human beings knowing their full capacity. So to me, the only logical conclusion as to why God would arbitrarily draw the line with human technology, because it wasn't human technology. Do you think it's the fact that it came from these unholy operators, these Nephilim, that because it came from them, that it was a certain level of advancements in technology and the intent behind the technology was so dangerous spiritually and physically that was the reason God had to disperse the people and stop the whole thing? Because again, that extreme action on God's part to flood the earth isn't really explicable outside of the fact that it was not just sin, it was the Nephilim issue. So the same thing about the technology within the Tower of Babel, to me, seems like the same idea. It wasn't just that humans got too smart, because God knew that. God knew exactly what humans were going to do, technologically speaking. But it was a reaction to the Nephilim intruding into the human space and giving them that knowledge and intellect and that technology that wasn't part of God's design. Just like every other aspect of Nephilim, they're not part of his design. And so to me, that justifies like that action that God took to stop the Tower of Babel and disperse the people.
I think that you're probably hitting on. I think that that's very plausible. I think that what they were tapping into was evil, and God wasn't ready for it yet. They were pushing an agenda that everything has to be done in God's timing, and maybe they were accelerating the timing as well as what you're saying. But technology is not a bad thing.
Right.
Right. It can be.
Yeah, but it's not surprising to God either.
It's
like
not. No.
Yeah.
You can't. Any technology we have pales in comparison to his. He knows
created
everything.
The natural laws that allow for our technology to even function.
Yeah. If you want to say he created the laws of physics, and laws of physics that apply here don't apply in other dimensions. Absolutely, yeah. So they were tapping into something that God had to stop. Whatever it was, it's conjecture on our part, but it was something that was so serious. He said, "There's nothing that they can't imagine that they can't do."
Yeah. So to kind of round off my point and to move forward, to me, it feels like the technological advancements weren't a difference in degree. It was a difference in kind.
Yeah.
So God knows the degrees that we can crank up our ability to understand the natural world. In fact, I think God and the church at large has always encouraged scientific endeavor to understand that God is an intelligent designer who has made a coherent set of laws and of observable nature that has order and it has logic, it has reason behind it. And I think that influenced and inspired our exploration of space, of physics, of all these different concepts. But so those are all degrees, to which we can understand the world around us. And I think there's nothing sinful about taking that further and further and further. But the difference in kind, I think, has to do with that nefarious Nephilim intent with their level of intellect. That is just like how God is a higher level of intelligence as we are. I believe angels and Nephilim are also a higher level of being and technological understanding and intellect beyond us. Is that a reasonable claim to make, that they are on a higher spectrum of intellect than humans?
Definitely. Yeah, because they're half supernatural.
Yeah, so that supernatural knowledge to me is the only thing that justifies the flood and the destruction and the dispersion of the people within the Tower of Babel issue. The difference in kind of in intelligence and specifically technology. Because to me, I would agree with you. I think we've been at that pinnacle of, we pretty much have a very dangerous level of information, technology, transportation. I think we've been there for decades at this point, but I think it's the difference in kind, just like you agree, and your point these past several episodes have been that Nephilim are going to return again if they haven't already, and they are going to bring with them not just a difference in degree when it comes to technology and information, it's going to be a difference in kind altogether from different dimensions.
Absolutely. That's exactly right. So I guess you could just say Nimrod's a pretty bad dude. You just want to
sums it up.
You just want to stay away from that man.
Yeah.
Anything else on him before we move on?
Yeah, let's just move forward.
All right, King Og. He's a giant hybrid. You find evidence of him in Deuteronomy chapter 3, verse 11, and Joshua chapter 12, verse 4. He is known for, what I find very intriguing about this dude is he built what is known as, did you know that there's a Stonehenge in Israel? It's called the Israel Stonehenge, and we have a picture of it. In the Hebrew, it's called Gilgal Famia, which means the circle of Raphael giants. The king of the Raphael giants, King Og. He built a Stonehenge. It's, as you can see, it's the different circles. They're huge, and then they go into that one little, looks like an altar in the middle. Over 40,000 stones, estimated 40 metric tons, ranging in 8 to 15 feet tall. This circular diameter of King Og's Stonehenge is used for, now, old writings from antiquity say that he would bring down light. He would open up light fields. Do you think that means he was opening up a portal?
Yeah, because other than portal, I can't really compute what that even means.
Yeah,
Light
so
fields.
and so they don't.
Yeah.
What I find, based on that, those old writings from antiquity of the light fields that he would open up on certain nights, and then you find King Og in mounds, his writings in mounds in Ohio. His language that he wrote that specifically details this Stonehenge and all that, because he was Amorite, so there's Amorite writing, and he made Amorite writing a little differently. So when the linguist, when they took these tablets, these copper tablets to the linguist, I forget at what university, they thought it was going to take years to figure out what it was, and the guy was looking at it and said, yes, Amorite, it's King Og's writing.
He just immediately...
Yeah, he just looked at it, and he goes, how do you know that? And he's like, well, I've just been over there studying that for a line. I know it by sight. Where did you find it at? What museum is this from? He goes, no, we dug it up out of a field in Ohio. And he's like,
and when was this?
In the 50... Well, I'll get the exact date for you. I don't want to... It was maybe between 1930 and 1950.
Okay.
And we'll do an episode. We're going to dedicate an episode to this when we talk about Stonehenges and stuff like that here in America. But King Og, we know, built that one. But what about all the other Stonehenges? King Og is mentioned, gives his bed dimensions. It says in Scripture he was a great warrior, and he's known for making this Stonehenge. And this Stonehenge is in what's called, you've heard of the Golan Heights before. It's in the Golan Heights up toward Lebanon. Getting over there precariously close to Mount Hermon with an eye shot of it. So, but the Stonehenge I find is unique, that maybe they were even doing portals all the way back, way before Christ came on the scene, right after the flood, as they kept going up through. I think that's what Og is going to be known for. And, his giants, when he was ran out of Israel, his writings and giant bones about his same height show up in America. So, did he travel from one hinge to another? We don't know if these hinges are made for teleporting yourself, like beam me up, Scotty stuff. I mean, think about it. There's nothing new under the sun, according to Solomon, right?
Yeah.
And so, get me my tin hat out, and I'll put it on, but I wear it because I think that's what they're used for,
Yikes.
But then after Nephilim went away, then these pagan cultures took them over and would do sacrifices and do other unholy acts within all these Stonehenges. So that's kind of what we think of, the Druids over at Stonehenge in England would go out there on the equinoxes and parade around and do weird stuff, right? And then all these other ones around the world, that's what would happen. But you got to go back to the original creator of the hinges, and that's probably Nephilim. And I say that because almost over 90, I had to get the exact number for you, but it's in the 90% range of these stone hinges within the hinge itself or within a close proximity, giant bones have been discovered.
Are you kidding me?
No, I'm not.
Like across the world, 90%?
Yes, across the world, in America, across the world. So
I did not know that
you don't have to be Einstein to connect that dot. Okay.
No. And I guess you have to be Einstein to know that, because that's a pretty well hidden, factoid.
Well, I told you that there's a concerted effort to suppress this information.
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. It seems clear to me that it's the reason that I don't know that's shocking, but the reason has to be that was intentional.
Now, this book here,
it should be known.
The Giants on Record, this right here goes through and details all the articles that we can find from the New York Times in America of giant bones and even the Smithsonian coming in and giving receipts to people to buy the bones, and then they just disappear. Huh. But bones were all Stonehenges of giants, right?
Yep.
When you look at these go way back thousands of years before geometry was even part of the math system, right? We know that geometry and trigonometry, you can trace that back to the Babylonians, really, and then some other cultures have taken it and adopted it. But the most advanced form of trigonometry goes all the way back to Babylon, and those magi that came to give Christ gifts, that studied the stars and all that. These guys were well versed in math above anybody else in the whole wide world. And these are done in such a way before geometry was a thing and trigonometry was a thing. It was Nephilim. It was Nephilim, ingenuity that built them, and they line up with how they line up. It's uncanny with the cardinal points, north, south, east, west, and with the equinoxes and with astrology. All that plays in, right? So almost all you have to go to the hinges, and there's a hinge that we went to, and I'm still trying to figure out how that lines up. And I do know it lines up almost on one cardinal point all the way down into the Etowah Indian Mounds down in Cartersville, Georgia. There's almost a straight line. I'm still having to pinpoint that line and get the right degree on it to see if it means anything, because I want to run those out all over. But you can start lining up. People have done it before. I have to get the book on lining across the globe how the pyramids and these stone hinges line up all across the world, and they all line up in these like symmetrical ways. It's not just a fluke. This didn't happen by accident. These were by design.
So there's proof that it was globally. I guess there was like a global collaboration on putting them on certain like points.
A Nephilim global. They were. I think they were mapping out the world in some way to travel.
Interesting.
Either it has to do with harnessing power, evil power. And if it does open up portals, which I happen to be one of those guys that believes it does, that's how they could go from here to there in an instant.
So it's kind of like they line up perfectly and they basically aim at each other. Like this is access point A, and you go through a portal and you end up at access B.
I think Zimmerman is the one who him and a couple of other guys have done. I know Zimmerman has done an exhaustive amount of work on giants just in America. Is it Hugh that did it's out there. We just got to get our hands on it because I've read it. I've seen it, how they lined them up, and it's easy to do that now, I guess, with Google Earth. I've tried it. I'm not that smart, so I got to figure out what they were doing, what program, how they did it. But you can see it just lines up. They all line up, with, and it's like uncanny how they do, even with the pyramids. The pyramids and the Zuggernauts line up, the Stonehenges line up, and it's just weird how they all kind of just intersect. It's like Nephilim intersected. It's some kind of mapping that we don't understand.
No, I think it just has to be a coincidence. It has to be.
It is. It's some kind of map. They mapped out the earth in a way that we don't understand, and we're never going to understand probably, until they come back, and then we might get it then. But why would you have these stone circles all over the world? I mean, do you think people just wanted to haul stones around when you didn't have dump trucks?
Yeah, when you think of an extremely hard thing to accomplish like that, it takes a lot of manpower and energy and time. You got to ask why. Like, you can't just tell me they were just on a Saturday evening bored and they wanted to stack some gigantic rocks. Like, you have to give me a solid reason as to why. And I feel like that's one of the big things that has always struck me. I've never really made the connection to Nephilim until we've obviously started this journey with this podcast. I mean, but really, why are they out there?
And why these megalithic rock structures that make some of these Stonehenges and things like that? Why you can't put them together with the machinery we have now? Especially, forget about the pyramids. That's a whole different scientific study. We're going to go on that because that'll blow your mind. That has to be made by something supernatural. At least the original pyramid of Giza. The other ones you can tell aren't as well constructed because the Egyptians came in after it was built and just kind of copied them. But that original one that's still there today, when we break down that structure, it's beyond a reasonable doubt that had to be made from something that is not from this world. Now, aliens, people are going to say, well, aliens made it. Well, since I don't believe in aliens, then I have to come to the point and say Nephilim built it. And they built these megalithic rock structures. They built them in a way that can't be replicated with our technology that we have today. To put them all online the way they are and have them symmetrically right, each circle going through different key points, and the pyramids and these big rock structures that are moving, they put them together, they hold in place, and there's no cement, there's nothing there, they don't move, they don't settle. Explain that to me.
Yeah, exactly.
In our next episode, we're going to start looking at the evidence that giants were all over North America. Probably in the backyard from where you're listening tonight. Throw a rock, and there's probably evidence of giants. That's what we'll unpack next time.